Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. I think for those of who've been to maybe 7 or more meetings, we get a medallion or something like that, if we get that. Thank you for coming out. This is a continuation of the process that we continue to work on as we move forward to get a final zoning plan and ultimately a development or redevelopment at the Ford site. This has been a long process, and it's been a very thorough process. Thousands of people have engaged. It was started over a decade ago by my predecessor, Pat Harris, who's in the audience. He's still coming to the meetings. He enjoys it so much. And it's a process that we've continued to work on thoroughly. The planning department has put together the preliminary zoning plan. They are continuing to update that, but there's still going to be many opportunities for us to continue to engage. There's going to be small meetings, large meetings. The district council, I know, is going to be very engaged. The task force, which has had, God, you guys are probably up to 20, 30, 40 meetings now, if maybe more. And then ultimately the planning commission, and lastly the city council will make the final determination on zoning. But this is a continuation of that planning. The voices are being heard. People are being listened to, and I think we're going to come out at the end of the day with a great product because we have so many people engaged, so many people interested, whether it's because you live near the Ford plant, you live a little bit further away from the Ford plant but want to live on the Ford plant, or whatever it may or may not be. I know that many people are engaged across our city, across our region, and especially in the Highland Village. But there are very few planning processes, I think, that have had this much planning and this much engagement. That's why 3 years ago we put together a transportation study, something that's probably never been done for any large development in the city of St. Paul so early in the process. Typically it's done at the AUAR stage, but we put together that transportation study so we could see how our neighborhood would be incorporated into the Ford site and how the Ford site could be incorporated into our neighborhood so that they can run flawlessly together. And I think that's an important component. And another important component is making sure that we strive for greatness at this site. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And we have the ability to do something great here. And the key to do something great, to make sure that we have a development that we are all proud of for future generations and proud of today. So I look forward to continuing to work with you. I know I've met with many of you, whether it be one-on-one at coffee, at large group meetings, and I'm sure that will continue for the next year and beyond. So feel free to contact me anytime. Thank you all for being here. Up next, we have Mayor Clapp-Smith. Thank you.
Hello, welcome this evening. I'm Merritt Clapp-Smith, and I'm a principal city planner with the City of St. Paul, and I've been working on this project for 10 years and have seen many of you at meetings throughout those years. So we're excited to share with you more details tonight about the concepts we've been discussing since the fall. So a reminder for any of you that are a little fresher to this project, our timeline for redevelopment looks like this. Right now, Ford continues to be in the process of preparing the site for sale. They're in the final stages of environmental cleanup of contamination at the site, which they hope to complete in 2018 or early 2019. They will then put the site on the market shortly before that cleanup is complete, and they hope to sell to a master developer. That master developer will come in and, using the framework of the zoning and public realm plan that the city has adopted, they will put together a detailed development plan, which will have to undergo a traffic study and detailed environmental review. If there are any impacts that are of concern to the city, they will be asked to make adjustments before they get approvals to then proceed with the planning, which would begin with the installation of infrastructure, street, sewer, water, and then the buildings on top of that. So the earliest we'd see actual digging of that early infrastructure beginning is 2020 or 2021. So this year, we're looking at adopting a zoning and public realm plan by the City Council, hopefully this summer or fall, and that's the subject of our meeting tonight. So the steps to that adoption right now, this last fall we came out with the concept plan and have been reviewing it and getting input since then, and we continue that process tonight. Later this spring, we will take a revised concept forward to the Planning Commission of the city. They will take a few months to review it. They may ask for some changes, and then they would recommend it to the City Council. The City Council would then as well take some time to review it. At each of those stages, there are opportunities for formal public input through a public hearing process. So in addition to giving input now, you can give input at those two stages as well. And the input we talk about comes from the public. And people ask sometimes, who is the public? Who gets to provide input? The public are neighbors, city residents, subject experts, prospective tenants, stakeholder groups, business people. Anybody can come provide this input into the concept to the Planning Commission, the City Council. So as has been mentioned, we've been working for over 10 years on this project. We've had over 40 public meetings. We've had over 1,300 different people that have attended one or more of those meetings. We have numerous articles in the media and on television, and over 50 presentations to business, civic, and nonprofit groups. And just since November, we've had 7 community meetings and 12 stakeholder meetings on the concept plans, and over 400 people have attended those meetings for the first time. So they'd never been to a Ford meeting before November 2016. We have a lot of partners that have been working with us on this project, and we're very grateful for the extensive support that they've provided on important aspects of the project and the detail. The city also has a team internally from the mayor's office, the Ward 3 Council office, and departments of Parks, Public Works, Planning and Economic Development, Safety and Inspections, the Attorney's Office, and the Office of Finance. And I'm up here in front of you as the voice today, but it's merely to represent the work of dozens and dozens of really talented people. We've also had a number of studies that we've done within areas of general planning for the site, traffic, real estate, jobs and business, existing conditions, and sustainability and stormwater management. And all of these studies are available on our website if you haven't learned of them previously. So where are we now? We came forward in November with the concept. We had a number of those meetings, and we got a lot of feedback and input from people. And there are a lot of words up here, so I'm actually going to read this aloud, because this is very important to underscore what we've heard. On the transportation side, there are a lot of concerns about traffic. People are worried, will it really work? Will it be manageable? What will be the experience for me living in the neighborhood or going through the neighborhood? And did the traffic study, which said that it can work, is that really true? Does that make sense to me? People have said that existing conditions in the area, as it is today, need to improve, particularly around safety and traffic management. There's also a tension between spreading trips out across lots of streets and protecting local streets from too much traffic. So do you try to spread them out and everybody shares the burden, or are there certain streets that feel that that burden is too much? And finally, there's strong support for designing the site for walking, biking, and transit. On the land use and scale side, we hear, yes, absolutely, let's have a mix of residential, commercial, and employment, and a variety of housing options. That's very positive. We'd like to see some single-family homes, which aren't in the concept plans. And some people feel the site is too dense, that it would have too many people and the buildings would be too tall. And then there are a range of building types and sizes that's good. Other people say to the counterpoint of there's too much, other people say, no, I like all the buildings and the variety. It's going to make it a really nice urban village with a lot of amenities and retail and services. So differences of opinion. And finally, on parks and open space, almost unanimous, people love the stormwater feature that would run through the center of the site. And they love the parks. In fact, they love them so much they want more of them. There's a focus on good river connections and a desire to respect the natural feel of the river valley. Wanting trees and vegetation throughout the site, really make it feel green again. And wanting fields for multiple kinds of sports. So we'll get into some of these as we go through the presentation. So we have made a number of revisions to the plan since you saw it in November. And up here you'll see numbers, and I'm going to read the changes that have been made, so bear with me here. Starting with number 1. We have removed a narrow linear park that was between MRB and the private homes because it would feel too much like it was in people's yards. And instead, we've extended a pocket park that was at number 2 that started at MRB and connected it all the way through to the neighborhood park that you see there to provide a better connection between those. On number 3, we've adjusted the length of some of those blocks so that they could logically be divided into 80-foot lot widths, which is what's proposed for that area. And in number 4, well, that's number 4 as well. So it's been about realigning the size of those blocks so that they split up well. Number 5, we've provided pathways along the water feature. And in the original design, we showed them having to cross the road. Instead, we think ideally that they, along with the stream feature, would go under Montreal so that you could have that continuous connection without having to cross a road. Number 6, we'll recommend that part of the green space that's required for those blocks around number 6 be focused in that central area so that we can create kind of a mini plaza at an intersection of 2 pedestrian pathways that are there. Number 7, we've proposed changing the zoning of this block. It had been identified as residential high, and instead we're proposing it be changed to a business mixed zoning. On number 8, we'd like to see the right-of-way along Ford Parkway widened to the south so that you have more space for bicycles to move along Ford Parkway and a wider sidewalk that would run along that length there to make a really good connection and experience for people going back and forth between the site and the village. And finally on 9, we've added a very short road that would provide access to the buildings on that civic square for parking in the buildings as well as deliveries and pickups. So that's what's changed since last time. And now we're going to go into detail about what the plan could be, what could happen on the site. So a reminder, here are the street connections that are shown on the site. New streets will connect to the existing road network around the site and disperse trips in different directions, while providing some relief, particularly with Cretin and Montreal connected to the existing bottleneck that exists at Ford and Cleveland. The streets will be different widths and designs, appropriate for the level of traffic expected and whether or not they have accommodations for bicycles or transit. And the recommended widths on the street are drawn to scale. However, this design that you'll see tonight and the concepts, we don't include details like bump outs and separated lanes, which ultimately would be part of the streets. And the map does also not show improvements to the road networks that'll be prudent to do around the site based on some of the concerns around existing conditions and to manage additional traffic in the future. So we've received a lot of good suggestions from people about those kind of improvements, and the city understands those concerns and will be looking at things possibly to do in the short, middle, and long term. Here added in green, we see the trails and paths along the site. Connecting the site to the neighborhood is essential in making these strong connections through the site to the river and down to Hidden Falls. So here's the zoning concept plan. I know the light's a little bright in here, so hopefully you can kind of see those different colors, and we're going to go through each of these in detail. What I want to underscore, which we've mentioned before, is that zoning has to be applied to every square foot of the site. So to the center of the road lines, under where a park would be, under where infrastructure would be. Technically, every square inch is zoned. And then what we put on top of that is our intention for the uses that would be on the land. So what this next image shows is where you still see the zoning colors, those would be private development areas, and the other places would be parks or infrastructure or private recreation spaces. So as we go through here, you'll see the layer of the zoning plus the public spaces. So what's allowed in the districts is a variety of uses. So along the left column, you see the zoning districts. We have 6 different districts. Again, we'll go through them tonight. And within each district, you're allowed to do different types of buildings. So there's a range of what you can do. For instance, in the River Residential District, you can do multi-unit homes, carriage houses, maybe something like a townhome. In the mixed residential sort of mid-section, you can do townhomes, multifamily, some commercial and employment, and civic or institutional uses. The most restrictive district is the Gateway District at the bottom, and this would be commercial and employment and civic uses only, and we will talk about that when we get there. So again, think of each of the districts allowing a range of uses as we go through this. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with zoning because it's complicated and pretty boring. But the zoning is the backdrop that makes everything on the site possible. It allows things to happen and it limits what can happen. So very briefly, here are the top things that happen in zoning that we regulate. One is building coverage of a lot. So how much of a private lot can a building cover? This example, this building covers 50% of the lot. So in our districts, we have a range in the concept zoning of buildings being able to cover anywhere from 30% of the lot to 80 or 85%. We also have open space coverage, which means how much should be covered by decorative paving, landscaping, grass. This one shows open space of 40% of the lot. We have the lot width. We only have that in the lower density districts. Says how wide the lot can be. And we have setbacks from the street, the side, if you're adjacent to another private lot, and the rear. And finally, we have floor area ratio, which is a little more complicated. Essentially, it's the total area of the building compared to the lot. And so what it really talks about is kind of the mass of what's on it. We're not going to get into detail on that, but it is a really important tool in zoning to sort of regulate the overall scale of what can happen. The other really important part of zoning, and we've had a lot of questions about this, is how are you going to ensure high-quality design at the site? So it is our intent that we will be preparing design guidelines that will be added to the zoning, and we will be working on those this fall and in early 2018. And those design standards will address things like building materials, details like doors, windows, decorative elements, what building frontages might be like, are they porches, stoops, awning, how might those be designed? And things like landscaping, how frequently do you need a tree in the boulevard, what are landscaping on private lots, etc. So design standards are going to be really important to get a high quality site, and it is our intent to do those and to add them to the zoning, and there will be communication with the community and probably some sort of committee to help work on those design guidelines. So we are about to envision the FORSITE. And I'm going to read a disclaimer. This is maybe one of the most important parts of the evening. The following images are for illustration only, to express the type and range of development that would be allowed on the FORSITE under the concept plan. They do not represent any actual buildings to be built on the FORSITE in the future. There's a little picture of a globe, and it says, imagine. So what this means is you shouldn't go out and put down money on a townhome unit that's shown on the map because it's only imaginary. And you also shouldn't tell your neighbor that the site's going to have a senior housing campus on it because it's only an example of something that could happen and there's no guarantee. So before we begin our visual journey, I want to acknowledge my coworker Mike Richardson. Raise your hand. Who designs all the maps and plan images for this project. And without his work, we'd all be confused and bored to tears reading zoning code. So with that, we will be using this large concept of an illustrative build out throughout the night. So The full build out of the site, we predict, will take 12 to 20 years, which means that, you know, the Ford site, would it look like this in 2040? No, this is just an example. But imagine. For each block and for each zoning district, we've created a building example. The buildings within each district are intentionally different, with some built to the high end of what would be allowed and some built lower than that. Realistically, we'd see a site built out like this with a range of what's allowed by the zoning, depending on the developer, the building use, the architect, and the real estate market at the time. Mike and I are not developers, and we're not architects. However, we've tried to provide realistic building examples by researching existing buildings that are around St. Paul, the region, and the nation. So let's start with our River Residential District. The primary uses in this district would be multi-unit homes and carriage houses. It would run for much of the length along Mississippi River Boulevard and wrap around back in over most of what is a stormwater infrastructure feature. Heights in this district would be 2 to 4 stories with 48 feet maximum, which is what is allowed in the critical area overlay for the Mississippi River corridor. This is the block type you would see in this district. So what would be happening on this kind of block? We begin with the multi-unit homes. So these look, the intent is that they look like a single-family home, and they would be set back 30 to 40 feet from Mississippi River Boulevard, which mirrors the kind of development pattern you see there today. But these homes could have 2 to 6 units in them. So your experience of looking at the site from the trails along there would be very much what you see today as you go along. On the rear side of these blocks, which are very deep lots, you could have carriage houses. These would be small dwelling units paired with garages that would line a narrow lane with setbacks that could have some landscaping. So the upper picture on the left shows what that kind of setback would look like along that lane, whereas some of these other pictures here are good of the form of what carriage houses can look like, but you have to imagine they'd actually be set back 10 feet. Parking for the large home could be included in the carriage house, or it could be done adjacent to or under the building of the main home itself. So together, the main home and the carriage houses in this district could not occupy more than 30% of these lots. Also within the River Residential District, at the southern end, you find a small park, which is adjacent to the bluff top and connects the water feature and pond to Hidden Falls. The image on the top right is from the Hidden Falls master plan, showing the hope that we can eventually connect the water feature from the site under Mississippi River Boulevard and directly over the falls. Here we move to the residential low district. This is primarily townhomes with some low-scale multifamily and maybe some limited commercial or live-work units, 3 to 5 stories, 55 feet maximum. What you see here is a range of how the blocks could develop, and we'll go through each of these. So starting in this district, you have a neighborhood park. So the neighborhood park, we haven't done any detailed design. That would be coming in the future, but we can picture the types of things that might be in this type of place. You could have playgrounds for young and old, and the bottom right picture is a senior playground. They have these now. So that man is doing something that's like an elliptical in the park with his suit on. You can just have open play space. You could have community gardens. Different things could happen in this park. You then have, in the residential low, a lot of these townhome blocks. These are all different images of townhomes. And in the center of these townhomes, you could have parking access to rear garages, or you could have some of the garage spaces sort of tucked under with access to the roads and have an interior space that's a central courtyard.
Can I ask a question? I just am confused about residential low. Does that have to do with density or building height?
It's both. It's both. Yeah, I think you'll see that as you go, that as you go, you'll see them filling more of the space as well as getting taller as they go from low to medium to high. So what we have here, we've heard a lot of people talk about how important senior housing could be at this site and that they'd love to see it. So here we explore the concept of using a mixture of townhomes and multifamily units to create a senior campus that would go from independent living units to assisted to memory care. And the example we have at the bottom left is a Beckettwood, which is right across the river in Minneapolis. It was built in 1987, and a lot of people use that as an example of something they would love to see at the Ford site. And on the right, that is another part of a senior housing campus. So we can't guarantee what developers come to the site and what they're going to build. But what the city and the master developer can do is go out and recruit for the types of uses, architects and developers that we think are a good fit for the site. So we've heard loud and clear that seniors a big interest for this site, and so we're going to work really darn hard to get it incorporated somewhere. So next we'll move to the residential mid-district. These blocks line the central stormwater feature through the site. Oh, sorry. 3 to 6 stories, 75 feet maximum, again a mix of townhomes and multifamily. So here we've stepped up to the mid, a little higher. So here are 2 different block forms. We'll go through each of these in detail. And what we expect in any of these zoning districts is the zoning standards set some limits on what can happen, but there's still a tremendous amount of flexibility left in how somebody might actually use that lot and design the buildings. So what we've tried to do in each of these is explore a range of building styles based on real buildings you see out there to just show the type of variety that might be possible. So at the northern end, you're coming off the Civic Square with a water feature that could have a more formal look or geometric pattern. There are tons of exciting examples from around the world of how to do these water features. And then along the edges, you'd have buildings that are primarily multifamily. They could have some commercial or civic uses, like the building on the bottom right. And the buildings here occupy about 60% of the block. As we move down to the next block, you might see the water feature becoming more natural as it moves through the site. This example in the middle is from Mears Park. And the residential buildings here show that setback from the sidewalk. The zoning envisions a 10-foot setback, which would be required in the district. And you can see in the bottom right, that's a shot from Minneapolis, combining a setback and trees. This is next to a 6-story building, and when you're walking along the sidewalk, you don't even have the experience of the building that's next to you because of the setback and the landscaping. Moving the next one down, again, this water feature becoming perhaps even more natural. There might be civic uses incorporated, the residences lining the water feature. And then finally, here you have the southern blocks, and you see some concepts here of buildings with stepped floors that could create small patio spaces for people who are overlooking the water feature. And what the site is attempting to do through all of this and all of these districts is to balance, create a balance between great open space and public amenities with a range of housing, commercial, and office types while providing economic value to support the amenities and the high-quality design. Now we're moving to residential high. This district would require slightly more open space than the other residential districts, so 30% instead of 25% to help offset the scale of the buildings you'd see here. In our research, what's been interesting is we've found that residential buildings are designed to provide windows to all the units, which totally makes sense when you think about it. So what that means is that in residential buildings, you're never going to find a depth on those sides with the units that's more than 80 feet. They tend to be about 62 to 72 feet, sometimes getting up to 80. So when you have blocks that are bigger than that, as you have here, what you end up with these buildings is they tend to design them either in a couple of buildings or in shapes around U's or open courtyards, so that you have these different hallways and lots of units with windows. So you don't get buildings that cover the entire site. The blocks in this district center on a pedestrian space, which might look something like the photo in the top left. The photo in the bottom center shows an interior courtyard space. These spaces, which could be public or private, can take many forms with features like landscaping, pools, little dog walks, grilling areas. And the three building images show residential buildings with ground floor retail, which you'd be likely to see on the blocks that are lining Cretin, on that side of those buildings. The buildings also show different ways that the upper floors step back and add some visual variety, as well as reducing the sense of scale to the street and providing better light access, and this could be something we could address in zoning. And finally, on that last block, you see on the left, the left building in the sketch of the buildings is based on the Episcopal Homes project, which you see a photo of on the top right, which is from University Avenue. So this is a senior housing project in our community, and that's the kind of scale it has in relation to these blocks. Transit service on the left, that would run along Cretin. And the main difference in this photo being that, again, in this district, we'd be requiring 10-foot setbacks between the sidewalk and the building. So you wouldn't see that kind of edge with a building built right up to the edge of the sidewalk. Business mixed. This runs along the Ford Parkway and connects to Highland Village. Retail and service, office, could be multifamily residential above 3 to 6 stories. These are the blocks that would be within that district, and the central feature is a civic courtyard. So here we start with the blocks that center around the civic courtyard. Lots of different ways you could lay out a civic square for events and activities and sidewalk cafes, incorporating public art, water features, et cetera. This can just be a great new place for this community. Then on the next block over, you have the more classic mixed-use buildings. The top right example is the Oxford Hill development on Grand Avenue, with retail on the first floor, condos above. The top left shows a downtown newer project called the Penfield with a Lunds in the first floor and residential above. And the bottom left is the Longfellow Grill right across the Marshall Avenue Bridge. So different ways, different building types you might see in this district. And the final district is the Gateway District. In the top left, that corner adjacent to the river, this is the area that Ford predicts might have contamination issues that would prevent future residential of any type on this part of the site. So this is where we've focused office, service, limited retail, kind of an employment district use that we call Gateway. And then also put a piece of it over on the block lining Cleveland and under the property that is currently the CP Ford rail yard. We don't know the environmental condition of that yet or what the cleanup would be, so the gateway zoning might be good for that as well. It's envisioned as 3 to 6 stories, 65 feet max. Here's the layout of these blocks. So in that northern corner block, you'd tend to see more office type buildings, and there's a park that holds that corner, a public park. Again, a great feature for the community. And then in the one against Cleveland, here we've explored the idea that that could be a great place for a civic building, like a community recreation center. So this building example is modeled partially on the Oxford Rec Center that's over on Lexington near 94. Parking for the site. People can get very excited about parking, or emotional, I should say, or frustrated. We will require parking for all uses on the site. We estimate that the site would have between 3,400 and 8,000 parking spaces based on this build-out concept. The parking will primarily be within buildings. They might, and in this plan, we've assumed that they're pretty much under or within all of the buildings, although ideally we'd like to see some adjacent buildings share parking together to consolidate that and make for more efficient land use. There will be some on-street parking in small lots, and bike parking will be required for every unit, housing unit. So these were the big hit numbers when we came forward this fall. You see them on the left side of the table under maximum. So what we talked about in the fall is what would be the high end of the build out in the concept plan that we tested the transportation and traffic based on, and the stormwater system design, and the energy system design. What we've done here with this sample build out is I've run all of the numbers based on the building sizes and typical sizes of housing units, et cetera, and we end up with a similar amount of square feet for the civic, employment, and retail uses, but the residential units in this build out are at 3,300. All of that would come off the little less than half of the site that's dedicated to private lots. About a quarter of it is dedicated to transportation, 9 acres to stormwater, 15 acres to private recreational fields, and 15 acres to public parks and open space. Almost done here, just a couple more slides. The economics of development. So people ask a lot, why do you think you have to do so much development on the site? Like, is that really necessary? Why can't we just build it all single family, or why can't more of it be parks? And it's about the costs of repositioning a site like this for development. So on the side of the scale that you see weighted down there, we have some balls representing the costs of doing this site. We have infrastructure, a huge cost, putting in all that streets, water, everything. We have the cost of open space, land that can't be sold or developed for any other use, plus the expense it takes to build those spaces out. And we have amenities, having to do high quality design, to put in street trees, things like that. All of those things cost a tremendous amount of money. And to make anybody be willing to come in the private market and do that means that they have to get value back out of the site to make that investment worth it. And that value comes from the development. So the balls on the other side represent theoretically different buildings. You have to have development to offset those costs. If you don't do enough development to offset those costs, then the site won't redevelop. So you have a choice. You can add more development to make it balance, or theoretically you could take away some of the open space or amenities. You can't take away the infrastructure, because what we've shown is a very basic layout for streets that would be needed for any level of development there. So you could take away open space or amenities, or you can add more development. Or if you want all the open space and amenities and infrastructure, but you don't want the development, then it's going to have to be subsidized. And you're going to have to put public money in to make that balance. So that's just conceptually how this works. People could debate for a very long time what that balance point is between development and value needed to make this site move forward. So lest we forget, sustainability will be an important part of this site. We're talking about transportation sustainability, things like solar and green roofs, night sky lighting so that we don't have a bright light that looks like a UFO landed on the site, and how we treat energy. And all of the sustainability won't be incorporated in the zoning and plans for the site. So we've been looking tonight to the future, and we all have different ideas about what that future might be. We think about it from our own personal perspective. What do we want that future to be? What would be a good future for the city? What would be a good future for the neighborhood? And there are a lot of different considerations to take into that. And so tonight we're going to have a panel to share some thoughts about different policy considerations that we have to weigh when we think about the future of the site. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to our panel moderator and my boss, Jonathan Sage Martinson. Thank you.
Why don't I have the panelists come on up? Am I staying on the slide, Merritt?
Sorry. And I'm going to stand here and do slides.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. As Merritt said, I'm Jonathan Sage Martinson. I'm the Director of Planning and Economic Development for the City of St. Paul. So we're going to spend the next part of our program talking a little bit about the policy considerations that Merritt mentioned. So anytime the city's changing, anytime you're building or changing the city, anytime you're redeveloping a part of the city, particularly a part of the city as large as the Ford redevelopment, there's an awful lot of policy considerations to weigh. And often we're looking for that balance amongst those policy considerations, thinking about what the city's going to be like in the future, what demand is going to be like in the future. So we've asked a number of experts who think about various portions of those policies that we're going to have to weigh as we think about the Ford site to join us tonight and to weigh in on kind of some of these key questions. So I'm going to very briefly introduce them so you know who's here, and then we're going to dive in to questions. So immediately to my right is Katrina Mosier. Katrina is the Interim Director of Policy and Planning for Ramsey County. She leads the countywide policy development, analysis, and planning that advance the county's strategic priorities. She joined this division in the county in 2014. Also, it's important to note her mother taught at Horace Mann, is that right? And she grew up just across the river in Minneapolis, so she knows the neighborhood. Next to her is Will Schroer. Will is a member of the steering committee that was put together to oversee kind of the transportation study that was done for the site that Councilmember Tolbert mentioned earlier. He's the executive director of East Metro Strong, which is a partnership between Ramsey and Washington counties, 7 East Metro cities, and some of the large East Metro employers. He at one time lived on Jefferson Avenue and also frequented Highland Village, so also knows the neighborhood as well as particularly thinking about transportation and future transportation infrastructure. Next is Barb Sporline. Barb is the Deputy Commissioner at Minnesota Housing, where she's been working since 2011. She has worked in planning and housing in the city of Minneapolis and the city of St. Paul previously, so also knows the city and this area very well. And finally, at the end of the table there is William Weber. William is a Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Sustainable Building Research and a lecturer at the School of Architecture at the University of Minnesota. His research focuses on integration of sustainability, resilience, and health in affordable housing. So each of them brings kind of a particular focus to their work that are important to the policy considerations as both we as those many partners have already weighed in and thinking about the Ford site, as you all think about the Ford site, as the Planning Commission and the City Council will continue to think about the Ford site. We're all going to be wrestling with some of these same issues. So we've asked this group to help us think about them some. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and we'll, no need for all panelists to weigh in if you don't want, but we certainly want to hear perspectives across the way. So I'm going to start with, what are the trends that are happening in population, housing, transportation, the environment, real estate, and lifestyle that you think should inform how this site redevelops?
In 2 minutes or less.
In absolutely 2 minutes or less. I'm going to clock you, Barb. So maybe we'll start with Will. Weigh in there, thinking about sort of what are those future trends and how should we think about them as we think about this site? And if you would use the microphone, that's great.
There we go. There we go. Excellent. Thanks. Thanks for having me, and what a great turnout, and great to be here. Because there are a lot of different trends to talk about, I'll just say a couple of things about transportation. The first is that everybody, young people, not young people, and older people are all using biking, walking, transit more than they used to get around. And you know, it's interesting, in my professional capacity, I see reports from AARP go over my desk, and they are really pushing, making options available to their members at the city and local government level, because not all of them can drive, obviously, But even those who can drive really want other options to get around. And it's just a little bit of an eye-opener, since growing up, that's, you know, progressive transportation policy wasn't the first thing that came to mind when you thought of AARP. But they have really been pushing this at the behest of their members. When people look where they want to live, and these senior housing options are very popular now, Merritt showed an example of Episcopal Housing, big new development on University Avenue, right next to the Green Line, very popular. An interesting little story that I'm going to have used up all my time. When people ask, I was talking to the director there, and I asked, you know, how it was working out living next to transit. She said, you know, it was really interesting. I really expected people to want to live in the back half of the building that didn't front university, right? Because it would be quieter. She said, all our front apartments, those are the ones in high demand. They want to be able to look out and kind of see the traffic, and that's the preference these days. And then the other big statistic that I'll leave you with is, at the other end of kind of the spectrum, millennials are absolutely demanding places to live where they have options, and they do not all have to own a car. So 2/3 of millennials say that they would only move, or that it would be a major factor in their decision where to live, is good public transit. And that if they don't have access to that good public transit, they are not going to move to that region. And we lose, if we don't have the housing that is next to good public transit for them, we lose access to that pool of talent going forward. And it's not just a sort of a stated preference. This is what we tell researchers, and then we go and we do something else. How do we know that? Because when we open the Green Line, the same month, ridership just skyrockets along University Avenue, right? We're seeing the same thing with the A line. It's not just trains, it's buses as well. When you provide high quality transit, there's always been bus service, right, on University. There's always been bus service along Snelling. But when you provide really high quality transit, then people use it substantially increased amounts. And this is a great place to provide access to that high quality transit. So I have a lot of confidence in people using that transit in the way that the transportation study says that it will, based on our trends. So I'm sure that was more than 2 minutes, forgive me.
Okay. Excuse me, does that mean buses?
So I'm going to ask you to hold your questions. We're going to have a chance, just as soon as the panel is done, for people not only to talk with various city staff that are here and some of our committee members, but also the panelists here. So if you have a follow-up, just so we can get through all these questions, we'll ask you to wait and catch Will in the next phase.
So I'll just run down a list of things that come to mind for me. First of all, thank you for having me. For someone who's done community development and city building her whole professional life, and having grown up in Minneapolis, this is pretty exciting to be here. For people looking for a highly desirable location like this in a fully developed central city, they want walkable, bikeable places to live. They want a good variety of housing choices. They want options for things to do. They like the energy and vibrancy of cities, and good planning, design, and execution can help manage any of the negative impacts, which you've already, Merritt talked about quite well. They want to live near where they go to school, where they work, where they play, where they grocery shop, where they eat, go to movies. So they want this mix of uses nearby. They really want to be near nature, water, trees, plants, interesting topography. They don't want to drive everywhere. They really care about sustainability, and broadly defined, not just the location and the site and the buildings, but the stormwater management and the access to things. So they want and need affordability. Haven't talked a lot about that. I don't know if you're at that spot in the process, but you know, there needs to be housing for a variety of incomes and where you're at in your economic stage of life. Many love the neighborhoods they grew up in, and if they're ready to move out, they'd like to stay in the neighborhood, but there's not a lot of options sometimes, so this is an opportunity to create those options. So if you're a young person moving out of your family's home, you may not want to own a home or be able to afford a home, and so you want some options. And then if you're older and your kids are moving out, you may not want to take care of a big house, or you may not be able to take care of a big house, and you love the neighborhood and you want options as well. So this site, first of all, in all my years in planning director and city planner, It's such a rare opportunity to redevelop 135 acres in a highly desirable part of town, but even rarer to have the owners and the community and the city and all your sponsors work together. I am envious and jealous that I never had an opportunity like this in my career, and I kind of want to live here when it's all built out. So I hope you take advantage of the opportunity and make it a really cool place to live, and not just for the millennials. There's other of us too. I like the millennials too.
She likes everybody. I think that just to shift maybe a little bit to a slightly broader trend, and I think the idea of developing a site like this in the context that it is, with the time horizon that we have between now and 2040 and potentially 2050, the trend is going to be towards resilient, self-sustaining neighborhoods and cities themselves, with low and zero energy, net zero energy buildings, meaning the site itself will supply all the energy for the buildings that are sitting on it. And I think that this goes to our aging infrastructure in cities as a whole and the need to rebuild and replace, as well as some real ecological issues that we have globally. We're allowed to talk about that or not. But also thinking about how that affects affordability, long-term financial stability for the project itself, the viability for developers, and so forth. But I think the trend when we're thinking about meeting the state and city goals on energy, water, reduction of use over the long haul is starting right now, because it's going to be here before we know it. So.
Great. Go down to Katrina.
Well, as it comes with going on, you guys said a lot of the things that I had commented on. So I think in general, to say that the county sees a lot of the same trends, so it's very consistent with that. A couple things I'd kind of add on to or just stress is something you mentioned, Will, about attracting some of the younger generation, and that we all know that the demographics of our population are changing right now, and in order to ensure that the county continues to be economically prosperous and a desirable place to live, we need to ensure that we are attracting that younger generation to live, work, and play here. So this development offers that opportunity to develop for a site that offers all three of those. Another thing that I'd just add on in some of the statistics around transportation, also building off of what the others have said, is if you look at the average miles driven daily throughout Ramsey County, since 2001, it's decreased 15%. So there's a lot, people are wanting to drive less, moving to transit, and different aspects like that. So it's something we have to keep in mind as we're developing in the county. And another thing to keep in mind is that the number of households that do not have a vehicle is increasing. In 2014, it was 11% of households, and 1/3 of those were people that were households that were headed by people with over the age of 65. So it's just some trends to keep in mind, like you're talking about as this site is being developed.
So let's build on that and start with you, Katrina. I'm curious about the larger issues that you talked about, both happening here in Ramsey County, but also across the country and in some cases globally. I wonder if you could think about how those, just give us a few examples of how those policies impact the thinking of redevelopment and development on the Ford site. So put yourself in the shoes of a developer coming to develop here. How do those larger trends begin to land and affect the development here? If there's a couple of examples that come to mind for you.
This kind of lies right at the heart of where a lot of the work of the county is right now, in terms of trying to, the mission of the county is to create a community where all are valued and thrive. So how do we look at our programs, services, policies, and investments in order to create and strive for that community? And as was said already, that part of what lies at the heart of that is collaborating among all the partners in the community in order to have a holistic look at how we take this opportunity for developing a site. One of the policies of the county that has continued to evolve and develop over the last few years is looking at an all abilities transportation network, and that was addressed some already in some of the revisions that Merritt looked at today. To start from the aspect of what is needed for the most vulnerable person using that transportation or using that infrastructure. And if you're starting from that respect, then you can build to meet the needs of everyone that will use it. And thinking from the aspect of no matter whether you're driving to the place you're going, at some point you're going to be a pedestrian in some ability on that site. So how can you build a site and build a community to meet all of those needs and to be accessible for all of those people in your community? It's one of the main driving policies.
Really, you want to?
You know, Jonathan, I'm going to expand a little bit on one of the trends that I touched on earlier, because I think nationally it's a similar trend and it'll help inform. Of course, developers and governments spend a lot of money trying to predict the future of demographics, because they affect the kind of zoning that the city has to do, but the developers also have to forecast what the demand will be, right? Between now and 2040, in the central counties of Hennepin and Ramsey, seniors will account for 70% of the population change, and downsizing households will account for 85% of the demand share. And that is a demographic, and to link back to the national and global change, that kind of demographic shift is occurring around the country. And so when Merritt shows pictures of a senior housing development, she's not only responding to what she's heard from you all, as I understand it, but that is absolutely in keeping with the demographic shift, not only within the whole region, but also nationally. And so I think planning for that is A, it's smart, and B, to not plan for that, I think would be really sailing against not only regional, but also national demographic changes.
Great. Others care to weigh in?
Do you want us to all answer everyone?
If you're burning to, otherwise I'll jump to, I wanted to talk about urban design. Okay, so let's jump to design and urban form. So I think about the city of St. Paul primarily having been developed over from the late 1800s to the mid 1900s. So the vast majority of the land was developed over that about 80-year period. And takes a variety of urban forms, the existing landscape in St. Paul. So we think about that urban form that exists today and kind of how the way individuals behave and relate to that form. I'm wondering if you could think about how things are changing. And as you think about this site, what are the sort of the best parts of urban design as we see kind of in our existing developments in St. Paul? And what are those pieces that you think we ought to capture for sure here? And is it in fact a blueprint of what we see already somewhere in St. Paul? Or do you see things we ought to change as we evolve? So this has to do thinking about just that basic urban form that we're laying out here in our public realm plan. And whether you think there's models around the city in terms of right here in Highland or in other neighborhoods in St. Paul, and how that's changing.
I'll start on this one. Well, I think Merritt did a really nice job, or the entire team who's working on this did a really nice job of laying out the variety of form. And the fact that you're going to have a concept plan or a master plan, which is your policy. This is what we want it to look like and function like. And then you're going to add a zoning, which is how you implement a policy plan. It's a regulation. And then include design standards. It's just really smart. I mean, it's all three layers. But the design standards you can work on, stepping things back, setbacks, form, massing, materials, landscaping, trails, all of those things, good design can mitigate a lot of what probably scares people about density. And density is anything higher than, well, everything has density, but anything higher than single family homes. So really good design. And, you know, you should hold yourselves and the entire development to really high standards when it comes to design. My experience is we tend to back off on that a little bit because we don't want to overstep or whatever, but or that we don't think of it ahead of time, and by then an afterthought. You can't get good design as an afterthought. So, you know, connected to the connections between buildings, the connections between the site and the greater neighborhood, integration, all of those things can be managed through design and infrastructure in the public realm. The green space, so you need to think of it ahead of time, because afterthought, either they'll say, I'll do it if someone else pays for it, or it's too late, or there's not enough room. So you can build good design in, and you should hold yourselves and the developers to high standards with this. And I think as cities, we tend to back off on that, so encourage you not to do that here. And there's so many well-designed housing examples. Merritt showed you a ton of them. There's many more.
I'm wondering if you might comment particularly on this. We think about the public realm plan and sustainability, for example. We're doing things a lot different today than we maybe were 100 years ago in terms of how we build infrastructure, how we think about it sustainably.
Yeah. Well, I think from the infrastructure standpoint, I would just say that two things. One, I think the overall appeal of the village type development and getting away and avoiding a potential suburban model, which could easily happen on a site of this size from a master developer, of providing space for cars but not prioritizing cars, I think is one way of sustainability is reflected in that infrastructure. But more specifically, when we look at the blue-green infrastructure, so we think about where the water's going to go and how we're going to move water, where the green is going to be, and how the green becomes not simply an add-on as part of the project, but is actually embedded in the thinking and the philosophy behind the project. And part of that, from a sustainability standpoint, if we think of living community examples, is really that they become interconnected. So our water systems and our green systems are really one and the same, and that helps with our water quality. The river's right there. We're gonna have an exposed creek running through the site. These are amenities, but they are also serving ecological services for the area. So I think that in the past we would have piped and dumped, and I think that we really are getting away from that. There's an expense on the infrastructure side from that. There's an ecological expense. There's a natural wildlife that is flushed, literally, when we have that. And I think, too, when we think about the resiliency and some of the frequency of the 100-year flood and the 10-year rains and 50-year rains that we're having, that this type of infrastructure for stormwater management, as well as how we think of building that amenity for recreational use, really can be interdependent. And if we take it on that way, it can be that way. But if we're not addressing it as such, then I think we go for a shortcut and get the water away as fast as we can, which isn't necessarily the best thing to do.
Great, thanks. Do you have something, Will? I'll jump to the next question.
Yeah, Jonathan, because you asked for blueprints from the past, and I would just urge people to think about the places in Highland and elsewhere in St. Paul that you love right now. And I actually spent the afternoon here just because I knew I was coming into this meeting and had a couple other meetings. I ate at the Highland Grill. I remember having great date nights with my wife at the grill and then walking across the street to the theater. There are only two places in the entire region where you can have dinner and then walk across the street to the theater. And one of them's here, one of them's on Grand Avenue, 3 places, and then the 50th in France in Edina. And those are places that don't have any parking lots. I'm sorry? Riverview, that's true, thank you. I've been in Riverview so long, thank you very much.
I'm keeping the list.
Absolutely, okay. But those are places that are, it's across the river, it doesn't count. Those are fantastic places that people just love, and they have no parking, literally no parking, right? There's 2 parking spaces in front of the theater, and there's 2 parking spaces in front of the Highland Grill. Mara touched on the emotion that sometimes comes with parking debates, and it's real, and I'm a transportation, I sit on the, the modeling committee, right? And we spend a lot of time talking about how much parking people really need. But I would encourage you, since Jonathan asked about blueprints from the past, think about those places where you love and how much parking do they really have next to them or in front of them. It's really very, very little. And so just think about that as a lesson from the past.
Great, thanks. I'm going to try to squeeze in two more quick questions, and then we'll move on to the next part of the program. So one of the questions we're often asked is, could the Ford plant be sort of a replica of what we see in the broader neighborhood today? So repeating what is in the majority of the Highland neighborhood form. So you've seen the plan tonight, reflects a little bit of that. So some of the street grid is brought in, for example, to reflect some of what is there today. But you saw also a lot of the forms that are different. They're either mimicking some of the forms we're seeing along some of our transit corridors, like Cretin, for example, or along Grand Avenue. There was an example there mentioned as part of the modeling here. So as you think about the form, it's likely to be different, and there's parts likely to be the same, some of it's likely to be different. So as it develops, somewhat different from the surrounding neighborhood, how does that change the existing character of the neighborhood? How do you think about that as you have new development that is different from the area around it? How does it change the character of the existing neighborhood? Does it? Does it not? And what kind of benefits does that bring as we're weighing sort of those policy considerations? What kind of benefits potentially does that different form bring as the site redevelops? So anyone feel free to weigh in to start, and we'll get a couple responses, and then we'll go to the last question, which is advice for us.
All right. Well, I think obviously with the Ford deciding to sell, it's going to create some change in the neighborhood no matter what. And that is something that I think anyone who lives, works, or plays here is fully aware of. And I always think about it a bit oddly. Growing up, you mentioned my mother taught at Horace Mann for years, so I grew up here a lot. But I actually grew up in Minneapolis, not on the west side of the river. I grew up on the east side of the river. Just no one believed I lived in Minneapolis. They all believed I lived in St. Paul because it was just across the border on East River Parkway. So I know this neighborhood well. And thinking about whether today, if somebody was going to develop a site and say they wanted to build a industrial site here, what the response would be today to that. So wherever the change is going, you have to adapt to that change. And one thing that I think is wonderful and started out with this presentation today was the planning that is going into this from the start, and the collaboration to try to look at what can be done on this site to meet the needs today and into the future, and take the character of this neighborhood today and look at where that is going in the future, and really try to meet the needs there and be practical about what a developer is going to be able to do in balancing those desires for built-up infrastructure and open space and all of those wonderful amenities that exist with what is realistic for a developer. And there's just the absolute need to find that right balance. And that is going to result in some change, but is also going to result in a lot of new opportunities in areas to improve the neighborhood's access to the river and how you live in your community.
I don't, Merritt did a nice job of talking about why this can't financially be a place of just single-family homes. I mean, it just doesn't work financially, the amount of cost of the infrastructure, but all the amenities and whatnot. But my opinion, and that's what I was asked to give, I don't think it should be all single-family homes. It's not, that's an incredible investment for very few versus creating something with a lot of options and a lot of benefits for so many. And if it's well planned and implemented at a pace, which it seems it will be, that's manageable and is the way to go. I just think doesn't threaten the existing single-family neighborhoods. It actually enhances them and augments them and gives more options. And the city isn't proposing any changes to those single-family neighborhoods, as I understand it. So, you know, I think I mean, it could be all industrial, it could be all businesses, it could be all high density, but the concept plan, as I've gotten to know it in only the last few days, is a nice mix of height, a nice mix of density, a nice mix of uses, I hope a nice mix of affordability and different options. So I think the form will be different, but it's different in a good way. It's more option and more opportunity, and the amount of the opportunity, that's all I keep thinking of when I think of this site, is you know, to leverage the regional transit system, to leverage all the clean water work we're doing, to leverage the affordable housing goals we have in the entire state, and energy efficiency. I mean, this is opportunity that you should leverage and embrace, and it looks like you are, and you're positioning yourself for success. So change is hard. I mean, change for anyone is hard, but you're doing all the right things to position yourself to manage that change and really create something pretty wonderful here. So I think it should change. It's not going to be a Ford plant, and I don't think it should be all single-family homes. I think what's envisioned is a really nice balanced concept.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. Last question. I'm going to ask you to give us some advice. So you've studied this in depth for the last 30 minutes, so you know it by the back of your hand. You've seen a new road network proposed for the Ford plant. You've seen connections to the river. You've seen park space proposed. You've seen a stormwater, an at-surface stormwater system. You've seen a variety of densities and housing types and zoning types. You've seen areas for business and mixed use. And you've seen some parking suggestions. So pick a piece or two and provide some advice. What kind of suggestions would you provide for us as we wade through making these iterations of this plan and getting to the final document? William, ready to go? Some advice for us?
I think one big thing is clarity of goals. I think if you start out with some real clarity around goals, and I know that you've done a lot of work on goal building, but you will go from goal to form really quickly. So I think that's one thing. And one goal that we haven't really talked about explicitly, but I think we should, or you should, consider, is how health gets embedded into the community. It's linked to transportation, it's linked to kind of the village form, it's linked to a lot of the things that you're doing, but I think making health explicit as a goal and tackling some systemic health issues for the community or the broader community, if need be, and being clear about what design options need to be taken to tackle those issues, I would really encourage you to do. The other thing, which is my cheater response, since I didn't get to answer the last question, would be to not let the Ford site development be an island. I really like the way that the road network plays into, feeds off of the major roads that are coming from the neighborhood, and the massing of the zoning plan is good and appropriate, in my opinion. We're taking our opinions. But I think there's a lot of opportunity that particularly when we're talking about the blue-green infrastructure and some of the other infrastructure pieces, to find their way back out into the communities and really knit this into the existing community, rather than have it be, walled off by the buildings that are being put there. How can you, through the streetscape, through the flow of water, through the movement of air and light, really tie it back across the whole community. So it's exciting. It's a great opportunity.
My advice is if you want, and I hope you do, want affordable housing to be part of the overall vision and plan, you have to be very deliberate and include that as you develop. You'll want to get it financed and integrated into the design and development as you go, because it is very difficult to do afterwards, because you won't have the most appropriate sites, or it'll be piecemeal, or it won't be integrated. And if you go with the 20% in any one building or 20% across the entire site, if you're talking 3,000 to 4,000 housing units, you're talking 600, 800 affordable units up to a range of, you know, 60, 70,000 income level. It takes 1 to 4 years to get any multifamily development financed with affordable housing. So it takes time, and you want it to be done at a pace that keeps up. And the good news is there's a large number of local for-profit and nonprofit affordable housing developers who know how to design and finance and develop rental housing in the cities on large redevelopment sites. So this won't be the first time. And with all the guidance you're going to have in place, it will be well done. So it has to be delivered, and it has to happen along the way if you really want it to happen.
Thanks, and thanks for asking for our advice. My advice to both the city and to everybody here is to start making improvements off the site before it starts to develop, and specifically around being able to walk safely and comfortably around the site starting today. That will benefit you all right off the bat. You don't have to wait till 2040, right? Once the site starts to develop, you can get there more easily. You don't have to drive there to take advantage of the new businesses that are there. And it'll hold down traffic for everyone overall. But, and I know that the city's already hearing some of that because I saw it on Merritt's slide. But that's my advice, is to start making those improvements now because they're good for everybody starting right now.
Thanks. Trina.
Thank you. I'll build on Will's, or just reiterate Will's comment on ensuring that there's a safe transportation network, in particular with the county and Ford Parkway as the site develops and before the site develops. And the other thing I would mention is also the inclusion of commercial and office space. One thing that I'm acutely aware of right now is as we're coming out of the recession and unemployment rates throughout the country, but including in St. Paul and Ramsey County, are decreasing. That doesn't mean that the affordability gap is decreasing. There are a lot of people that are working again, but they aren't necessarily able to afford their homes and all of their living expenses with that, and the gap has actually increased in recent years. And so what a lot of our work and investment in the county is working at now is creating higher paying jobs. So if you are able to not just create service industry jobs, but also some higher paying offices and jobs that are in your community, people can start to lessen or start to reduce the affordability gap that exists in Ramsey County right now, and provide some spaces that aren't necessarily there now for those higher paying jobs.
Thank you very much, and if you all would help join me in thanking our panelists.